one. Okay, so it looks like for differentiation, we had people talking about using a wall map. A map is great. You know, I heard some people talking about, oh, they need to know all, you know, all about the different countries and all that. You don't really have to necessarily get in depth with that, but it is great to have a map just to kind of show students, orient them, look at that. Color coding,
question?
Yeah.
For those of us who didn't go to schools of education, what is differentiation?
That is a great question. Thank you for asking that, Jim. So differentiation is basically just how do you accommodate different students and different abilities. So that might be, we have a work and life class and we have an academic class. And Jamie's activities were from her academic class. So differentiation might refer to how would you modify those activities for a work and life class, for a lower level class. But differentiation also occurs in the classroom when you have 15 students, and obviously we know all those 15 students don't have the same background knowledge, don't have the same skills and abilities. So what can you do to kind of meet the different needs of all those students as best you can in a classroom setting? So that's kind of what we're referring to. Thank you. Color coding, using a highlighter to identify evidence in readings. Use colors on the map. Does anyone want to, if you wrote these, do people want to flesh out a little bit more about what they were thinking here? Does anyone have anything to share that they maybe wrote, if you wrote on this?
I use colors in my classroom, you know. We have colors, and they like, you know, they like to paint and to use, you know, the colors.
Okay. So maybe have them highlighting the evidence in a color?
Yeah, yes, they kind of differentiate with colors.
Okay.
It goes back to the thing of people have different ways of learning. I mean, some are very visual, and the colors they can recognize and they'll remember it rather than the words or a line drawing or a cartoon or something. So put it out there for those for whom that'll be particularly useful.
Great. All right. Do the timeline first or have a wall-sized timeline? That's such a great idea. If you can have I had a timeline that I kept up through the whole unit when I did a unit on Jim Crow laws, and it, just because, I want to throw this out there, just because you put an event on your timeline doesn't mean you have to fully delve into all of the history of that event. You can put events on your timeline like World War II, World War I. You don't necessarily have to get all into those, but what you're doing is you're helping orient students in history. What you say, you know, I'm talking about this event, women's suffrage, where does this fall in the timeline? Was this before or after slavery? Slavery is a big thing that students sometimes don't always have a context for when did that happen. So, you know, that might not have to do with what you're talking about, but the point of the timeline is to orient students in a historical context, even if they don't know every event. That's okay. We're just kind of trying to orient them. So I love the timeline idea. Maybe attach the colonies to the map or with stickies. That's a great idea. Like stickies, what do you think, like little stickers? Post-its. Okay, that's a good idea. Okay. Did anyone who wrote those things want to expand any further about what you wrote? Okay, then I'll move into extension activities.
Are you sure? Yeah, Jessica.
I mean, I could maybe expand on the wall-sized timeline and just give an example.
Go for it, please do.
I used to teach social studies back in the day. And one time, just as an example of just giving context through a timeline, we started a term out where we were just doing political parties throughout the term. And we started the term out by coloring U.S. maps on the results of elections from the start of the United States to now. And so then we just put them in chronological order around the class. And then as we went through history, they could really see like the changing of the events and the changing of the political culture. And it really helped to orient themselves because anytime they got confused, we could just point to the timeline and be like, okay, what was the culture like in the United States at this time?
Yeah.
And they were like, oh yeah, well this was when it was shifting from this political party to this one. We remember.
Yeah.
And so like having the wall timeline can really, really help to orient.
Giving students events on note cards as you go, saying, okay, where does this fall? Put it on the timeline yourself. Great idea. Yeah.
I just did throw in a timeline advantage, which also works with people for number lines. If you use clothespins, you don't have anything permanent, and you can change your unit so that you can focus in between a particular time period or extend
Yeah.
to a big time period. Everything is movable.
Yeah, that's a great idea. That's a great idea.
Brittany, could you talk about that timeline and the color coding that you did for that timeline?
Yeah, okay, that's true. So when I did a unit on, it was about civil rights, but we spent a large chunk of it talking about the Jim Crow laws. And so I had written different events on note cards that I had just put up around the room. And then I had different colors. So for amendments, those were a green note card. So any amendment to the Constitution was a green note card. Supreme Court cases, Brown versus Board of Education, those were on pink cards. And then just historic events were on white cards. So like Martin Luther King Jr.'s I Have a Dream speech would just be on a white note card. So again, it was just kind of another way to help students organize that information. It made it a little bit clearer what those different things were. So when they saw when we talked about Brown versus Board of Education, then when they continue to see it on the timeline, it's on a pink card. Oh, that was a Supreme Court case.